Welcome to UnTrended, where we lift the lid on extraordinary ideas about business and culture. I'm Nicole Jones, and with me are Jon Lonsdale, CEO, Louise Brooks, Senior Copywriter, and Lottie Hutchins, Senior Account Director. Make it punchy. These three small words strike fear into the heart of anybody working in an agency, simultaneously meaningless but also liable to crop up at least once in the production of every B2B campaign. Yes, today's topic is feedback. We all know that feedback is meant to help. It's how we make things better. But in recent work and culture, where most of us have been trying to be kinder, more inclusive, and more mindful of how we communicate, has feedback started to lose its edge? Have we become so polite that we're afraid to say what we really mean? And if so, what's the cost? Are we losing clarity, creativity, or just time? Then there's client feedback, the kind that can make or break a project, test your patience, or leave you staring at an email wondering if your sanity has actually vacated the building altogether. Why is good feedback so rare? How do we actually help clients give us the feedback we need? We'll get into all of that and more. But to get us started, it's time for On Trend, where our guests give their takes on a recent cultural happening related to our topic. Let's dive in. So, for On Trend today, a law firm recently reported that it's hiring a support worker for Gen Z lawyers on sizable salaries, noting that these workers go to HR when they're told that they're wrong. So is this a worrying trend about a generation that can't take feedback, or is it a good sign that Gen Z are standing up for themselves against what could be a culture of bullying or feedback that is inappropriate? Jon, it was you that actually flagged this article to us, so I'd love to get your take first.
Okay, yeah, well, I spotted it because I've got kids who are not far off that age, so it sort of struck a chord with me. And I think that lockdown and the last 5 or 6 years, particularly with that age group, has had a lot of bearing on the way that they take or get feedback, because I don't think they've had as much right from school. So I don't know if that's true with the law firm, but it really struck me as it's something that I've seen in our workplace, that it's feedback has become a more difficult thing. And I'm still not sure whether that's just because times have changed, people have changed, work's changed, but I do think it's worthy of a chat because it's so important to the way agencies work. So.
And there's quite a lot of stuff around like gentle parenting these days and sort of this culture of never really criticising a child from quite a young age, and I think that does something quite profound to your psyche as you grew up. Louise, what's your take on that?
Definitely. I think I agree with that, but I think the whole debate is obviously quite nuanced. I thought what was interesting about that article in particular was that there was a line around, you know what, young people these days, they're like only working from 9:30 to 5:30. And that I thought that was quite amusing. So I was like, that's probably their contracted hours. And I do think that obviously law firms are like a whole different beast to agency world. So it is a different lens, but I did kind of feel a bit sorry for Gen Z in that moment. I thought, oh, poor Gen Z. I think actually it's okay to work your contracted hours.
Yeah.
And I think just because you had it harder when you were younger doesn't mean that the young people today should also have it as hard.
Yeah,
that's true.
Mm-hmm. I think there is a little bit of oversensitivity, but I also think the buck ultimately stops with whoever's giving feedback, and like giving feedback in the right way is so important. I personally love feedback, and I think all feedback is good because people need to learn and you need to develop. It's how you take it and how it's delivered. That's really what sets it all apart and makes the difference of someone taking it in and receiving it in the best way. I think with that article in particular, I think it is a little bit overdone that they are making it such an issue. I think people just need to give feedback and then do it in the right way. They don't need to hire in a whole expert.
It's very contextual, isn't it? Because I think you have to stack up the fact that if you're a young lawyer who's being paid 100k a year and you're sort of 24 years old, I think you have to accept the fact that you can't have it sliced both ways. You can't be getting paid this really huge sum of money, but then also be like, I'm very young, but I know everything and I shouldn't ever be criticised. On the other hand, I really do agree that there probably is a culture of feedback that is bullying or overly harsh or overly dismissive. And so finding a balance point between those two things, definitely. I think is really important.
Yeah, and I've seen it as well in business that you can get a very toxic environment. I'm not saying that those law firms are, but I do think that you can imagine a very masculine environment of law firm, and you either it's right or it's wrong. I think and I suppose law is right or wrong, whereas I think in the world of marketing that we work in, it's nuanced, isn't it? But I think young people have to know that there is a certain standard of things that need to be done where they work.
Yeah.
And if I think back to like all all the bosses I had before I worked at Publicis Pro, there was always this idea that you wanted to do it as well as the person who was your boss, and that culture of learning the next step and what it took to do something. And I think that's changed. I definitely detect that's changed.
Yeah.
I don't see people around the agency going, "Oh, I wish I could write a PowerPoint deck like John." You know what I mean? It's not.
Nobody
it's not
ever could, John.
No. Well, believe me, they could. It's not quite the same. But I do remember really sweating over, I want to make this really great because I'm going to share this to my line manager. I'm not sure that's quite the same anymore.
It's the generational hierarchies, isn't it? I can even remember going into the workplace and looking at people who were sort of in their 30s and 40s and being like, wow, one day I'll be like you. I don't think anyone's looking at me in the office and being like, when I grow up, I want to be like Nick.
Yeah.
I don't think so, but I will say on the creative team, we have some Gen Z creatives, and I'd say they're more diligent and hardworking maybe than some of the millennials, and actually don't fall into this kind of like stereotype of like lazy Gen Z who are not bothered, who just want to work the bare minimum. And I think that's quite notable, and I sort of feel quite proud of that in a way. I don't know whether that's whether it's to do with us or them or our sort of hiring, but I think it's quite good.
I think it's about giving the permission to challenge. That's what I love about our job and where we work. I love it so much when a young person who's relatively new in their career asks questions and challenges people, because I just think that says so much about the character, the curiosity, the want to make it better sort of thing. And I think it's often about giving confidence to, if we're talking about younger people, it's about giving confidence, permission for them to do that with people who might be 30 years older than them. That shouldn't matter.
Totally.
So I'm quite big on that, because you spot that. It's worst is when let's do that.
Do you understand? Are you okay? Yeah. And then 2 days later, it's completely wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And that difference in perspective is so important in the work that we do as well. We don't want everything to be the same. Like, that's the beauty of diversity. We want the younger talent to have these new ideas and to bring it to the fold. It's we don't want yes people. That's not what we're about.
Okay, so getting into the heart of the episode, we're going to be diving into this topic that everybody in agency land has very strong opinions about, which is feedback. I'd like to kick off this episode by really talking about the culture of feedback within businesses. We'll come on to client feedback later, because I know that will be a biggie. But the first thing that I want to ask is that over the last few years, I think we've had this shift towards a more polite and considerate working culture. Can that maybe affect the honesty and the clarity of feedback? Have we reached a point where trying to be kind and trying to not upset people actually prevents us from engaging in a meaningful conversation? And perhaps, interestingly, will kind of recent political shifts maybe swing that back a little bit the other way? So, Lottie, I know you've got lots of thoughts about feedback, so I'll go to you first.
I think that we can really do a disservice to people by being too sensitive and too kind when giving feedback. I think honesty and transparency is always the best way to go. I think there's also, and I think this is typical of millennial managers actually, we want to be everyone's friend. And that really doesn't help in the whole feedback dialogue. You're being too gentle, too sensitive, when really they just need to hear the direct feedback, critical or not. I don't think there's no reason being too kind, too fluffy about it. If you need something fixed, you need it fixed. So that's how I feel.
Yeah, clarity is crucial.
I think feedback's like any skill. I think it's something that you have a muscle for, and you get good at giving feedback. And I'm talking honestly, when I used to run sort of for more functional teams around, say, PR, or which is where I started my career, I think I was really good at giving feedback. And as I've got, I guess, older, more experience, and probably have less direct line management experience of work, I think I've become really bad at feedback. So I think, and I put that down to a number of things. Maybe it's time, experience, or whatever. But I used to really take time to sit down with people and talk through things, and I wish I could do that a bit more. I should do that a bit more. But I think it's almost, I think it's something that you have to learn and put time into as a manager, as an agency person. You can't just expect to be good at giving feedback straight away. Some people struggle with it, and I know I do a little bit more now than I used to, ironically. So I've actually got worse at giving feedback. So that's an interesting one. It's not just about when you start your career. I think you can get worse at giving it as you get older as well.
Can I ask, John, as the CEO, the person who is usually the kind of ultimate decision maker, how do you feel about taking feedback?
Well, I always say this, I wish I had got more feedback. Because I don't genuinely get any feedback on anything, apart from my wife. But that's a different story. But in the agency environment, and I seek that out. So I find myself seeking out feedback from people. So I would go, I've just put this down on paper. Can sometimes to Billy or to Pete or to other peers, I'll go, could you just give this a like check? Is this complete rubbish? But I don't get that naturally because there's nowhere to get it from. And there isn't some sort of like, agency leaders CEO club where you can just plug in and get that. You have to seek it out. So I think as you get older and more experienced, and you have to find ways of getting feedback that is not in the traditional linear way. You have to just seek it out.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you start to question your own sanity. You need people to give you that. That's not quite right. If I were you, I'd do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to seek it out. I don't get any.
No,
So
I can imagine that managing up, people are probably quite fearful of coming to you to tell you feedback. So.
and also there's also this thing is just by the virtue of the fact that you're managing the agency, you've got the answer to every single question, and that is just not right. Like
I just take it on faith that you know what you're doing.
well, no, trust me, I don't always
Making it up.
I don't always. I suppose you get around it with experience and talking the royal we about the collective knowledge of the agency, but you don't know everything that goes on in marketing. You can never keep up with it, so you have to rely on other people to do that. So yeah.
Louise, what's your take as a senior copywriter? You're very much at the intersection of giving feedback to people below you, but still producing a lot of work, which is regularly fed back on. How do you feel about it?
Well, I'm naturally quite conflict avoidant, so I definitely struggle with giving feedback. I always kind of feel a bit like, I don't want to upset people. Kind of what you were saying earlier, Lottie. Like it is that thing of like I want to make sure everyone's happy all the time, but that's not really possible if if you're wanting to kind of grow and develop. But in terms of giving feedback, in terms of like the more mentoring role that I take on, I actually find I'm just really lucky to have a really great team, and I find that quite straightforward. But I think in terms of like across the agency, I definitely don't find it easy at all.
But I think you've worked on that though, right?
Yeah,
like, it's not as if
definitely.
you just all fell into place. You had to like set the tone or set the environment for feedback to be given either from you or to you,
Yeah.
So I think it is an environment you create. Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. And I think as well, it's something that just as anyone becomes more senior in their career, it is just something, and maybe we'll go on to talk about this a bit, but as a more junior person, it's something that I used to get very anxious about. But I think as you get more experience and you have more experience with working with different types of people as well, it all kind of contributes in and it gets better.
The thing that I find interesting, so I had a conversation with somebody that I no longer work with, but was junior to me for a long time. And talking about this idea of niceness and wanting to be friends, she made the point that often with not having clear enough feedback, she realised that she wasn't meeting expectations, but then nobody had ever explicitly set those expectations for her because we weren't speaking with enough clarity about these are the standards, these are the things you have to do. So we have this weird thing, and I think it's kind of not to harp on about COVID too much, but I think it's a hangover of that.
Yeah.
You used to get so much learning by osmosis, sitting next to each other, quick corrections, don't do that, do this, let me look at this quickly. And then over COVID, that just all went away. And then we came back to this world where we don't really give people super clear instructions because we're just rushing around, do this, do that. Oh, the feedback, this isn't great, I need to fix it, but it's got to go over by 5 p.m, so I'm just going to do it. So you end up in this bizarre situation where we're actually not setting the expectations, and then when the people aren't meeting those expectations, we're then not explaining it. So we just end up in this loop.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. My point about becoming a worse feedback giver. I've definitely done that, and I find that the half an hour meeting syndrome of this has all got to be finished and done and decided on in the next 25 minutes before the next call starts has driven a really bad behaviour. So it's really rare for me now, and it shouldn't be, but it is, to sit down and spend proper time with somebody on like a piece of writing or a presentation. It's always like a collaborative effort. And I do think technology has a role to play in that as well.
Yeah.
So, Slack, Teams, the fact that we share documents now is almost like this iterative that it will all become great at some point in the future, and we'll all work towards that rather than someone often owning the whole output. And I find that like quite I think it's made us probably a bit more time efficient, but I'm not sure the quality is necessarily improved.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah,
I'd agree with that too.
Interesting. Do you think that we are likely to see any sort of course correction with all of this narrative that's been going on in the last year around, whether it's businesses becoming more masculine or people just speaking in a kind of more direct and potentially less kind of culturally inclusive, sensitive way? It's obviously a really tricky one because that context is not a nice context, but is there any potential gain to be had from actually, you're not in business to make everyone feel good, you're in business to get a good outcome?
I think that it's obviously really tricky, and that's why we're discussing it. But there are lots of studies that show that actually positive feedback gets the most out of people. People's performance improves the most after getting positive feedback. And so my worry with this is, this kind of thing around, we're being a bit too nice, we need to be a bit more direct. Actually, are we then creating a culture of fear? Are we going to take it too much the other way?
Yeah.
And I think having that like positivity and that building that kind environment so that you then can be direct and really clear and then it is taken in the right way is more important. So it's almost about building that foundation first and not getting rid of niceness completely.
Yeah.
I think that's important, but then I think people abuse that kind of situation and where they just focus on the positivity, they skirt around
Toxic
real-
positivity.
Yeah.
Toxic
Yeah.
positive.
And then no one's actually learning, getting any better because you've just focused on the positive and everything feels really lovely. And it's like, but you're still making that mistake that I really need you to fix. But because I haven't been direct and told you, it's not going to get fixed. And I think you've got to be really careful. And I agree, though, like people do want, the positivity is so important. It has to be a part of it. Not a shit sandwich, though. That's gone. We know what.
We're not doing that.
Yeah.
Not doing the shit sandwich.
shit
I
sandwich is
did
dead.
some training and I do remember that they said that.
Yeah.
So do you want to explain the shit sandwich just in case?
So the shit sandwich is when you start with a positive and then you go in with the meat, which is the negative, and then you finish off with a positive. So it's a shit sandwich. The negative is in the middle. Enclosed.
So why aren't we doing that anymore?
Because it's an old school way of giving feedback, and I think it's been proven that it doesn't really work. It's not that effective, and it's quite expected now.
I guess it's the thing about directness. If what we're saying is that we need to find a way to be simultaneously kind and direct, actually couching the message that you have to get across in fluff is not the way to achieve that. You need to
I
just...
think that's definitely true, but I think that it all comes down to communication skills more than anything else. It's not necessarily like a temperament thing. You can be nice and direct. I would say, Nick, you are my boss, for context, and I would say that you get that spot on. Like you are very direct. You will tell me if you have a thought on something I've said or done or whatever, but you are always very nice about it. And I think that I'm not saying that's easy. Obviously, it's a skill. It's something you learn, but I think there is a way to do it.
I read a book. Well, I don't know if you've read it. There's a book called Radical Candor. Have you read Radical
Yes, I
Candor?
love that.
That is a really good book to read for anyone who's listening. But it's basically the idea that if you can give a radical candor, radical feedback to someone, right to the point about you look really silly that you do this, as long as it comes from a great place. And I think that's just put that out. As long as you know that you're in a safe environment.
Yes.
I could say, the fact that you mumble your words or you look like this when you do a presentation, it doesn't do you a disservice. That is not like me being harsh or unfriendly or unkind. It's actually because it comes from the place that I want you to be a brilliant operator or person. So that's something that I think you have to...
I would actually, funny that you mentioned that, because I would attribute reading that book to a massive personal shift I had in just realising that actually I can be a lot more direct because I really care about my team, not because I'm on some mad power trip. I think that I know the answer. It's realising that in the early years of my career, I was so worried about making people feel bad that I didn't help them do well. And actually doing well is what makes you feel good. That's what gives you self-esteem.
Yeah. And I've just had a personal experience with my son who's in a work at the moment, and he's almost like in a work placement, his first job, and he got some quite direct feedback early on around the way he was operating in the office and how he was, and it hit him quite hard. But actually, a month later, it's completely changed his attitude to work, and he's tightened up a few things that were important to him, that were important to his company, and he's flourishing. So I think it can course corrections at different stages can make a massive difference to the way you operate as a marketing person.
You might not respect that feedback in the moment, but then you look back and you think, actually, I needed to hear that then to learn. I remember when I was starting out, I got some really negative feedback about my perception and how I came across, and that was quite negative. And at the time I was like, no, I'm the bubbliest person. Like, this is wrong. These people do not know me. But I look back and I think from their perspective now, and I'm like, yeah, actually, I probably was. Didn't like it, didn't agree with it. But in hindsight, I needed to hear that to grow and evolve. I think that's really important.
And you definitely are the bubbliest person now.
Yeah,
thanks.
confirm.
Yeah. And it's a challenging one as well, because, feedback can be gendered, or it can be biased, or it can be problematic. But ultimately, I think that it is always worth being open to hearing it. I certainly feel frustrated when I do work and I don't get anything back from it, because it's like, well, maybe that was the greatest thing I've ever done. Maybe it was terrible, but I've got no idea.
Yeah, no, that is literally the worst thing.
Yeah.
And I think back to the COVID thing, that's what happened there. We were all working so independently, weirdly, and even if we were part of a company, that we just got in these little weird rabbit holes of our own feedback, which was horrible.
Okay, so if we switch it into a place of the client feedback, why do we think that it's so hard for clients to give feedback. And, you know, I want to make it very plain here. This is not about digging out our clients. We love our clients. But I think both clients and agency side would agree feedback is difficult, and getting the work to the place where everyone is mutually happy with it is difficult. So why do we think it is so hard for clients to give good feedback?
I think more often than not, they just don't really know themselves. And so they're kind of trying to tell you something, but they have got this abstract idea or vision in their mind, but they're not articulating it in the right way. And it just sends everyone off into like a tailspin, because you're trying to do what they are telling you to do, but you're not getting it right because it's just not there.
Yeah, I always think with feedback and clients, it's about, first off with clients, I think you can set that environment from the start with a new client, because you can say, this is how we work. We want to create the environment where it's okay for you to critique our work, and it's okay for us to come back to you and say we don't agree with that critique. Because if you've got that trust, the whole thing works. We've had brilliant client relationships on the whole, but when things haven't quite worked out, it's because you start to distrust each other's relative feedback. So I think that's the first thing. You can create that as an agency, and you set the bar, and it's all to do with culture and how you come across and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's important. The other thing I'd say is why clients struggle a little bit sometimes. It's usually because they're under massive pressure that we sometimes forget in agencies, that we just want to get the video or the script or the piece of writing perfect because it makes us feel good and it goes out into the world. But for them, it's because they're under massive pressure. They haven't had time to give feedback properly or even review it. They just know that their boss won't like it or whatever. And I think I've noticed that in the last 3 or 4 years in B2B, where times potentially haven't been that great in the industry, that there's been a lot less people giving good feedback. So I think it's a time thing.
Yeah,
I think there's a thing around like feedback committees as well. Like so often you would have 2 or 3 people reviewing one bit of work, and again, because of the time pressure, they're not doing it as a collaborative unit. It's going, you know, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then stage 1 disagrees with stage 3, and everything gets misaligned very quickly. If you could get to a model, I'm very much always of the school of thought, can we hop on a call? Can we just talk this out?
I agree.
If you start to get more than 2 comments deep in a thread trying to explain something, I'm like, let's just cut the bullshit and get on a call and try and figure it out. And definitely like having compassion for clients. I think it can be really easy in an agency to get frustrated, but it's like everyone's stressed, everyone's busy, and actually coming at it from a place of mutual compassion is probably a better way to start.
And also like, you know, my big bugbear is like, everything doesn't have to be a Teams call. You forget clients are on like 10 Teams calls a day, one after another. How are they going to give like really thoughtful, focused feedback on a specific thing when they're just on the gravy train of that? So just a mobile call, face-to-face meeting, whatever, just to do that really breaks that up and gives quality time, I think, that I've found. Better feedback from those things than your usual, can we just jump on a half-an-hour Teams call to discuss it? It's like, no, thanks, I've got enough going on.
I've started encouraging my clients voice noting me, like WhatsApp voice noting, just like cut through all the other noise. It's a little bit more informal, but it gives them a bit more time and freedom to actually say what they're thinking.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Trying to get it across a bit more. So yeah, something, I mean, it's a bit annoying on the old WhatsApp, but it does the job.
Love a voice note.
Written articulation. There's a reason that you would hire a team of copywriters to do written articulation for you. It's actually really difficult to get across what you want to say. So
what it is, I mean,
I like the voice notes.
I'm sure all of us have had this before, where you've had like a comment on some work from a client, and you thought, what on earth does that mean? Or that doesn't make any sense. And then you've actually got on the phone with them, and they look at it and they go, oh, I completely didn't mean that at all. And it is that thing of like, everyone's busy, everyone's stressed, like you've said, and they're just writing stuff in the moment. Whereas actually, articulating it is a lot easier.
I've like, one thing I've realised in thinking about this podcast and feedback a bit more deeply this last week is that, and this is a confession, I can't do autocorrect. I can't do track changes. I just can't do it anymore.
John, I thought we were friends. You can't do track changes.
I can't do track changes. Like, I'll put my hand up and say, if anyone sends me a document with track changes in, I don't know if it's like an emotional thing or it's a technical. But like, I can't do it. So I think, I don't know why. I've just been, I've had one the last few weeks. It literally, like, my eyes start rolling in my head. You know, when you have to read the different colours and try and read the street. Can't do it.
Well, maybe that's some insight into why clients sometimes, that's true.
Simple markup mode, guys.
But maybe that's why clients sometimes struggle.
I just can't do it. I mean, you know, I'm embarrassed to admit, the CEO of a leading B2B agency can't use track changes.
Is that why you like PowerPoint so much? Because you can't do track changes on PowerPoint?
Exactly.
There we go.
Exactly. So, no, but that thing about the comments reminded me that a misconstrued comment, like, don't like this, or can we rework this paragraph? You know, they're just like terrible, aren't they? Because where do you start with that? So I think that's why I like talking to people about stuff.
Yeah.
So what would we say in terms of, obviously, like, we've got obviously a lot of compassion for our clients. How can we help clients give better feedback, and how can we be better about taking client feedback?
So I think the onus is on us. We've got to ask the right questions to kind of pull it out of them. Again, they might not know what they're trying to think or say. So we've got to be asking those questions to paint that picture with them. And as you say, get on a call, get on a voice note or whatever, and just have a conversation. There's no room here to be misconstrued. If you want a good job and you want a quality output, let's just talk about it. But yeah, onus on us to ask the right questions to get to the right point.
I've had varying experiences of this throughout my career, but I think one really important point is to get creative people in early with clients, because I think that once they meet the person writing or designing or strategizing or doing whatever on that bit of work, they are going to just inherently trust them a bit more, because they're like, oh, it's Nick writing this tone of voice guidelines. So I know that I know her and I've met her and she's very smart and I trust her. And, so I think that is a really good thing to do.
Yeah, because there are two schools of thoughts about this. Some people think that creatives or strategists or specialist skills, they should be kept in a little walled environment where they don't really engage with the client and they're just kind of free to get on with the work. And I do understand where that comes from. But I am very much team, get me as involved with the client as possible.
Yeah.
Not because I want to waste time, but because I feel that if you come from a place of human relationship, you are primed. You are primed to want to be positive, to want to be receptive, and to find a sort of collaborative outcome.
I think we've probably, we've seen different cycles of that in the agency. We've tried different approaches, and definitely the latter has led to the best work, the best client relationships, and having creatives close to the client writers is absolutely. I agree.
We want to go on the drinks too.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Say the creatives on the drinks.
Right,
Absolutely, and we're a laugh actually.
I mean,
so.
a laugh, yeah.
And final question for everyone. What is the most memorable bit of feedback that you've ever received, and why? And I want to make it very clear, this doesn't just have to be about your work. It could just be about your life in general. So, John, you're laughing, so I'm going to... John's got millions of memorable bits of feedback to plow through.
Yeah, I have. So I've got two. I've got one that was negative, one was positive. The most positive one was when we did a pitch once and the whole room stood up and started clapping.
Wow.
Without any prompt. Like we finished our presentation, they just all stood up, and that was like, oh my god, to your for die now moment.
Yeah,
this will be back. So that was amazing.
I've got chills just.
I know.
Wow.
But like, thanks for our presentation. They literally all stood up, and started clapping.
Wow.
We did win the pitch, and the negative one was when I was at university. I did history, and my professor was an expert in American civil rights, Martin Luther King. He'd written biographies of Martin Luther King, and I did an essay, and I was very proud of this essay. And in my conclusion, he put in red pen. That's a great point, a great conclusion. But if you're going to plagiarize my work, you need to just learn to be better at it. And he gave me a great. It was all, and he put a smiley face. So that was before smiley faces were like a thing, an emoji. And I've learned that I built a career about being better at plagiarizing. As a result. But it's right, because there's no such thing as a new idea, right? You suck stuff in and then you represent it. But I just represented it a little bit.
Too close in.
But it's always stuck with me. It's like, just be a great plagiarist and your career can go far.
Lou, what about you?
Yeah, I've got a positive and a negative. So my best positive feedback was years ago I worked as a receptionist at a co-work before I had my sort of Peggy Olsen Mad Men to senior copywriter. And there was lots of members in this co-work, and one of them said to me, and this was a genuinely very sincere comment. He was like, you're very personable and easy to get on with, and that will get you far in life. Just being like a nice person to be around actually is really, really valuable in the workplace. And I thought that was really nice, and that's really stayed with me. And my best negative feedback was in a previous role. We were working on some articles for a client, and there was this one article that I just couldn't seem to nail, couldn't seem to get it right. And the client ended up sending one of the versions back with a note at the top just saying, this writer is just not good enough to write this piece of work. And that was that. So,
brutal.
She's just not good enough.
She's just not good enough. She can't do it. Right. She's out. So yeah, that was that. I know.
Lottie, what about you?
Well, so mine's the same bit of feedback, but it depends who you are and whether it's positive or negative. That I'm chaos. Like, I am a chaotic person, and it's either positive chaotic energy brings the energy and is, quite...
You're very vibey.
Yeah, but it can be a bad thing. That can stress people out, and it can be too much. And it's too much personality.
She's too much. Let's not get into that.
Oh, yeah,
we like the chaos.
Gendered feedback, but yeah. So I think the chaos one for me is kind of like, it depends what side of the fence you're on, but I'm a bit like Marmite.
Embrace the chaos.
Yeah. I would prefer Marmite to being bland.
Yeah, true.
What about you, Nick?
So my most memorable bit of feedback actually comes from my year 5 or 6 report card that I found in my mum's attic.
Oh, wow.
Which was, Nick has a tendency to think that she has made her point before she has. And it sounds daft because, again, this was on something that I'd written when I was, like 9 years old or whatever. But I think about that all my time in the writing today. It's really easy to assume that you've said what you think you've said. But sometimes you just haven't. So, you can say something, and because in your head you have the context, you're like, right, yeah, I've covered off all the points here. But actually,
That's so true.
That's a good
Nick
one.
has assumed she's made her point, but she has in fact not made her point.
That's so funny.
So I've worked very hard since then to
I love
be
that.
more direct and clear and make sure that I've actually said what I promised I was going to say in the first place.
It's amazing how those things have really stuck with us all, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like proper, they are big career moments when
Yeah.
you get that
Yeah.
feedback. So
It's our creative director Jamie once got the feedback. Could we have a writer who has English as their first language doing,
And that's really-
doing this writing?
and that really says all
I think
ill,
that's
doesn't
stuck
it?
with him. He definitely talks about that at least once a week.
yeah.
All right, it's time for our final segment, Mailbag. We'll draw a question from the mystery bag and pass it to our guest for a quick fire response. 90 seconds or less, team.
On behalf of all early career agency folk receiving what feels like dodgy feedback, how on earth do you figure out when to stick to your guns and when to give in?
I think from a copy perspective, definitely pick your battles. If there's, prescriptive edits, it might be easier just to do them. You don't want to pick on every single little thing. But if there's something you feel that is really wrong, I think the best way to go about it is ask a question. So you can respond to the comment and say, I'm not quite sure if this works. What about X instead? And it's almost like bringing a solution to the problem rather than creating more of a problem and just being like, no, I don't agree with this.
Mine would be just ask for understanding, a bit like news. Ask for understanding of the feedback. So where does the feedback come from? Because I think you often get more out of that than the specific thing that you need to change. So where does this come from? Does it mean it needs to be more X or Y? Gives you more, and then it gives you more confidence. Then the next time round you can go back to it. So for me, it's asking finding the root of the feedback rather than the feedback specifically. And the first few times when you're doing it, you've got to learn your craft, you've got to learn your trade. But I still think don't assume that the person giving the feedback is always right. I think that never leaves you as an agency person. You can be in agreement, but you can also think we can even make it better or whatever that is.
One thing that I feel really strongly about is encouraging people to see feedback as a dialogue, not as an attack. So very much when you're working in, say, a Word document and you're having comments, I always try and get people to actually frame their questions in a way that creates a little chat within the thread. So it's not just a kind of cold exchange. It's about having a conversation, priming people to explain things to you. And then when people have comments, again, being willing to dig into it a little bit. Don't feel like it has to be a thing that has to be rejected or agreed on.
Yeah.
It's not black and
That's
white.
good advice. Yeah.
Definitely, it's like come to a sort of combined resolution.
And also, just being very pick your battles. Sometimes you have to kill your darlings and accept that you've got something that you really like, but it's not working for the client. Also, making sure that you remember the client sometimes knows things that you don't. They have context that you don't necessarily have. So,
Absolutely.
That's a good shout. Being discursive rather than directive in feedback is definitely a more beneficial well for me personally, because I can then engage in that conversation. Whereas it's can you change this paragraph to this, then I start to go, I'm not sure that works. So yeah, that's an interesting, I hadn't really thought of it like that.
And I think to your point earlier about making sure that we have time to give junior people feedback, be really prepared if you're early in your career when you get feedback. So much of it is almost like a kind of gut check of, is this right, is this not right? And people who are senior to you can often glance at something and in a single second give you a perspective that is new or has a slightly different take on it that kind of de-escalates it from as serious as it feels. So that's a thing to do, actually draw in people that have more experience and be like, can I just grab you for 10 secs and get a view on this? Does it pass the sniff test? It's giving me the willies, so should I respond to it or not?
Yeah, that's right.
That's all for today's episode of UnTrended, and that's a wrap on season 1. We'll be taking a short break while we try and convince our finance director that having a company podcast will definitely pay for itself at some point. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit subscribe or follow where you're listening. And in the meantime, we've got lots of previous episodes for you to enjoy. Got questions or ideas? We'd love to hear from you. Just use the link in the description of the show to send them our way. Thanks for tuning in to UnTrended. Catch you soon.